Today's program is titled Leveraging LinkedIn, Optimizing the Tools for Leads. A special thank you goes out to Leslie Lewis for sharing her social media expertise for today's program. Before we get started with today's presentation, I'd like to draw your attention to the links box, which is located to the left of the slide. There you'll see a link labeled Course Material Website. When selected, you'll be directed back to the learning platform where you can access the presentation slides and complete the webinar evaluation. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Leslie Lewis. Leslie, welcome.
Hey, everybody. I am so excited to be here today to talk a little bit about the opportunities available to you through LinkedIn. I was asked by AHLA to contribute in this way because Willow Marketing, based out of Indianapolis, where I serve as Director of Client Service, I've partnered with AHLA to help with some social media strategy and planning for them. And LinkedIn has certainly been a topic of conversation as we've been partnering together on how to leverage social media as a whole. Part of the work that Willow Marketing has done for AHLA was facilitating a survey last year, not quite a year ago, probably about 8 months ago, to find out from its members how they wanted to use or how they wanted to see AHLA using social media to reach them. And I bring that up just to say that there was a very large percentage of survey respondents who wanted most of the social media content to be coming through LinkedIn because there was a feeling that LinkedIn is where professional communication should happen. And AHLA members are certainly not alone in that sentiment. LinkedIn is widely considered the benchmark for professional networking amongst social media platforms, also considered a virtual network of contacts. It has been around since 2003 and has been steadily growing. I'm not sure how many on the call today have been using LinkedIn since 2003. I certainly haven't, but have been using it for, about, I would say, at least 13 years or so in my own professional career. A lot of times people have gravitated to LinkedIn perhaps because they were job seeking, and that is certainly still a large reason for being on LinkedIn, is when you're trying to find either a new position for yourself or also trying to find candidates that might be a good fit for a role that you're looking to fill. But more and more, LinkedIn has been discussed as a way to generate leads and keep one's own business or one's own company strong through maintaining solid relationships with one's network and, I guess, putting one's best foot forward in a professional sense if someone is to visit your profile. So today we're going to talk about some of the basics related to using LinkedIn. And I say basics because I would imagine that everybody on this call has been on LinkedIn. I'm going to take a guess and say that everyone on the call most likely has a profile. But then it just becomes a question of how fully fleshed out that profile is. I've gotten ahead of myself a little bit, as I do tend to do, and you can see on your screen that just a reinforcement of the message that LinkedIn is still going strong, and the people that you want to reach and want to connect with are on LinkedIn. If you need any additional rationale as to why you should be using the platform. I think that, and again, this is a guess, but I would imagine that everyone on the call today would intend to use LinkedIn. It's just a question of how much of a commitment you're going to make to LinkedIn in order for it to yield any returns for you. And that's another thing that we'll be talking about today, is how you can integrate LinkedIn into what you're doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to make sure that you're engaging with the platform and not only expecting the platform to do work for you. It is a two-way street, and you have to give to your network in order to get from your network. So keep that in mind as you're assessing the current activities that you're performing on LinkedIn and the frequency with which you are visiting and engaging with the platform. So the creation of one's profile, again, I will wager a guess that people on the call today would already have a profile. If not, not a big deal, and you'll learn what to do from a setup standpoint today. But those who already have a profile, we want to make sure that it is optimized for performance. So what you're looking at right now is kind of a simple, some simple guidance on what you should do from a profile photo perspective. I still see professional profiles with no photo whatsoever, and I also see professional photos with a more candid photograph, which is okay in some settings, but I would say for any member of AHLA, the vertical that you are in, the type of work that you are completing, you would want to make sure to have more of a professional headshot and one that makes you look friendly and approachable. Again, if you are hoping for this platform to open up opportunities for business relationships for you, you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward, or I suppose you could say your best face forward. When profiles have photos, they do get 21 times more views and 36 times more messages than those who don't. So if there's anyone online still holding out or still not completely convinced that a photo on your profile really matters, hopefully one of those statistics might be enough to move the needle for you. The next thing that you would want to do is flesh out your profile. So of course, most profiles are going to have your work history, perhaps where you earned your undergraduate and graduate degrees. Sometimes people will add in a little bit of a brief descriptor of who you are or what you do. And those things are very important, somewhat foundational. But one thing that I discovered, I would say sometime in the last year, as I was working on my own profile, which I admittedly don't tend to as much as I would recommend doing to all of you. So some of these reminders are going to be good for me today too, is that there's a profile strength indication. And when I logged in to make some updates on my profile, I was greeted with this ranking, I, of course, is not terribly pleased with, as I would like to have a strong profile strength. This is something that the profile automatically provides to you, and it's a very easy way to go in and have the profile walk you through or kind of coach you through strengthening your profile in general. And it's largely based on making sure that you have enough information or as much information possible posted to your profile to ensure profile completeness, I guess that I would say, and they call that profile strength. So you could also see with this screenshot that at the time I logged in for this, surprisingly enough, I don't know whether I had just missed it or whether a form field had been added. I didn't have my current location. And sometimes there are things that we'll have set up on LinkedIn that are a little bit of an assumption. I think that to date, or to the date that I got this profile ranking, I would have thought, well, I've got my employer tagged. I'm linked to my employer. My employer is based in Indianapolis, so, you know, my location would probably be pretty evident. And that was true for me because I work and live in Indianapolis. But of course, not everyone works out of the city that their employer is based out of, so it is important to distinguish the two. Here's an example of not particularly impressive stats, but stats nonetheless from the basically analytics on who is engaging in my profile. So I could see that 56 had viewed my profile, there had been 106 post views, and 26 search appearances. So this is something that just like any type of analytics, whether it's Google Analytics on your website or any kind of performance metric, you're going to want to decide how often you plan to check in on this. There's going to be probably a variety of levels of commitment to leveraging LinkedIn, I would say, for the people who are on this call, would be, again, my guess. So there are going to be some of you who want to just implement some best practices, and that in and of itself is success, and that's totally fine. Sometimes that is enough to get more from the platform than what you're getting currently to date. On the other end of the spectrum, there might be people who are very committed to making LinkedIn a critical source of leads and business for themselves, and you're going to want to see how the activities that you're adding into your workflow, how you're engaging with LinkedIn, what kind of results that is yielding for you, and how you're seeing the metrics move. So for someone like that, I would say you should plan on getting into LinkedIn and checking out what's going on with your performance metrics at least once a week. And that's something to be thinking about throughout this webinar as we're talking about ways of engaging with the platform or monitoring success or whatever. You're going to want to think about how frequently can I afford to add this into my daily, weekly, monthly life. So weekly, for those who are pretty gung-ho about analyzing your performance and optimizing said performance, weekly is what I would recommend to you. I touched on just briefly several minutes ago that I would assume that everybody is aware of some of the foundational components of the LinkedIn profile, such as your work experience and your education. And that is really what we see people filling out on their own profiles most frequently. However, LinkedIn has consistently added opportunities for its users to provide more and more information about themselves for their network or for network prospects. So in addition to work experience and education, you certainly can list your licenses and certifications, your volunteer experience. Under the umbrella of accomplishments, you can add what publications you have been published in, what patents or how many you own, courses you have completed, projects you have completed, honors and awards you have received, test scores you have earned, languages you know, and organizations you are a part of. You can also highlight skills and endorsements and highlight recommendations. Now, endorsements in particular is generated, or those are generated by your network. It is a collaboration between yourself and your network, what skills are listed there. So we'll talk about that in a moment here. And then recommendations are generated by your network. So the strength of your profile in relation to those content types will be dependent on your network, but there are some things that you can do to drive their engagement with your profile and increase your chances that you're going to have a collection of recommendations and endorsements for people to view when they come and visit your page. So here we take a closer look at skills and endorsements. I would wager that it was probably, I don't know this for sure, but about 10 years ago when skills and endorsements got added to the platform. It might have been even more. I just remember personally speaking, one day I got onto LinkedIn and started seeing some messages, that Marcus has endorsed your skills in team building. Sarah has endorsed your skills in leadership. And that was before I had personally added or self-identified, I guess, any of my personal skills. So I've got some skills that are associated with my profile, even to date, that I didn't disclose myself. And I've never gone to the trouble of removing those, though some of the endorsements I've had are related to jobs and roles that I had earlier in my career. LinkedIn does cap the number of skills you can list, but it's not a terribly small number, so I have not personally been in a situation where I've had to edit any of those skills down and therefore eliminate some of those endorsements. That would be a consequence of doing so. I think you'd only want to make any changes to your listed skills and specifically the ones that others have identified about you if you are serving in a dramatically different role and very few of the listed skills really still pertain to the work that you do today. The other thing that you'll notice, I don't really have a specific tip to offer to you about this, but you'll see that some people, like with training, I've been endorsed by others who are in turn endorsed themselves. So if people are looking for the credibility of your endorser, it's good when they have that skill listed or endorsed themselves as well. You could probably drive that a little bit, that if you got an endorsement from someone and you wanted to increase their credibility and could do so authentically, you could go and endorse that skill in return on their profile. You just want to be careful with those things. There aren't any hard and fast rules about how much of the quid pro quo type of exchanges that you get into on LinkedIn. There's, of course, unwritten decorum rules for this platform, just like there are for any platform. But I think a bit of advice that I would offer to the group today is don't give to others solely because you expect to get in return. So don't provide an endorsement of skill to someone else because your focused, goal is them giving it back to you. They often will, but they won't always. And expectation tends to lead to disappointment. So just keep that in mind. And that also applies to providing recommendations to people on LinkedIn. Try to give those freely without any expectation of a recommendation in return. As I said, you often will get one back, but not every time. So try to give those freely without any sort of other intent. That is one, both of the endorsements of others and recommendations for others should be something that you try to build into your planned engagement on LinkedIn. And that's something you'll want to think about of, do you want to have once a month where you go and you do make some focused effort there for those particular tactics within the platform? Do you think that you can remember that if you block off, one day a week or something more frequent or less frequent for LinkedIn, that you just want to kind of lump all of your engagement together? Just kind of depends on how you like to work and how focused you like your time to be. So I've already been referencing recommendations. Here are two that I have, one of which I pursued, I suppose, and one of which was given to me. And both of those things will happen on LinkedIn. If you provide a recommendation for someone else, as I've mentioned, they very well might give a recommendation back to you. Sometimes a recommendation might pop up that you were totally not expecting. And then other times, you can solicit recommendations if you feel comfortable doing so. If you are not already with your clients and your colleagues asking for some kind of feedback with the work that you perform for them or with them, you should be thinking about doing that, and LinkedIn is a great way to do it. Increasingly, ratings and reviews of people are very important, as it's become a significant piece of how people evaluate potential partners or service providers or anyone they plan to do business with or engage with in some form or fashion. It's likely that they will seek out some kind of rating and review if they haven't been given a personal recommendation, verbally or whatnot, a referral from somebody that they know. So this is important. And you notice you can view both those that have been received and those that have been given. And I would go into this with the assumption that people who are trying to get to understand the work that you do better could feasibly engage with and explore both of the content types. So think about that as you're writing recommendations for others, that is public, and potential clients could read those. I think it can be a very positive reflection upon a service provider for people to be able to read the type of recommendations and kudos that you are giving to others. So I think that's a very good thing. Here's this ask for a recommendation, which you can do through the platform, and you can also just ask for people in your normal workflows, such as email correspondence, or you're wrapping up an engagement with a client, et cetera, and say, hey, I've been making more of an effort with my engagement on LinkedIn, and if you feel so inclined, I'd love it if you would hop over to my LinkedIn profile and give an assessment of what it was like to work with me, so that other future and prospect clients can don't just have to take my word for it, I suppose. So we've talked about some different content types that are available for publishing, and then, of course, veered into some of that engagement there at the tail end of that section. Just very, very important to think about LinkedIn, and this is true for any social media platform, as not a method for one-way communication. It is all about engagement, and this is the number one mistake that I see clients making in regards to social media, is that they see this as a publishing platform rather than an engagement platform. So just as important to your success with LinkedIn is how you maintain your content, add to it, and how you engage with others. So let's get into that topic right now. I don't think that I'm surprising anyone with the news that you can maintain a professional network and increase your contacts through LinkedIn. The platform wants you to increase your networks and to be successful there. So, if you've ever been on LinkedIn, I'm guessing that you have seen how almost aggressive, quite frankly, LinkedIn is in encouraging you to expand your networks. I've thought before or noticed that LinkedIn makes it a little bit difficult to X out of the screen where it's prompting you to add to your network, which to me is a clear sign that there's no question of LinkedIn's interest in you actually taking action on that. So they'll serve up people in your network that they recommend you connecting to, whether it's something related to someone who is in a similar group that you're in, or someone who has similar connections or shared connections. There is, all of those things go into the algorithm that LinkedIn uses to display potential connections. It's really up to you on what sort of connecting criteria you want to use? Do you want to connect with people that you only have 5 mutual connections with, but they work at a desirable employer that you'd like to have an in with? That could be a reason to connect with someone that doesn't have as many mutual connections. Someone who you have 163 mutual connections with here, as you see with Christian, you probably want to go in and check out a little bit more about what's the nature of all of those connections. And then if you decide to try to connect with them based on that recommendation, send something a little more personalized. Connections are accepted at a much higher rate when there's a personal note attached to it, a reminder that LinkedIn gives you just about every time you're trying to connect with someone. So it's important to kind of understand how you can include the personal touch or the reason why you are reaching out to them. No one who is on LinkedIn wants the platform to be just heavily used by others to advertise to them, especially when it doesn't feel relevant. So you're going to want to make the relevancy and the intent very clear. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. Definitely book time on a regular basis to do this. If there's anything that you can take away from today, it's figuring out what do you want to start doing on the platform that you're not currently doing, or what do you want to do a better job at that you are doing but you're not super invested in it, and then block the time on your calendar. So if it's 2 mornings a week when you're on the train and you're going to use that time to do your LinkedIn connection activities, that's great. Or if it's when you're with your kids in the evening and we're all watching a movie and you want to be on your phone just knocking out some LinkedIn connection activities, just figure out a way to bake it into your day, or it's probably not going to happen the way that you'd like. The notifications are really important to check. There are different ways that you can explore what's been happening with your network, because you're not likely to be monitoring people's profiles on an individual basis. That would be absolutely impossible. So you've got activity feeds, and then you also have a notification feed. So oftentimes in those notification feeds, it's going to show you who has moved into different positions, perhaps switched employers or been promoted. And that's a really great way to, a really great conversation starter, perhaps for somebody that you haven't engaged with for a while. LinkedIn makes it very easy to do quick reactions to things. So notifications like that, you can just sort of like it, or LinkedIn will serve up quick, quick text responses like congratulations, exclamation point, or good for you, exclamation point. It allows you to engage at a higher volume, perhaps, than you would if you were writing personal messages. But I would say if one of these notifications represents high potential of return for you, an old colleague has been hired in on a company that's on your target list of companies you'd like to work for or provide services for, take a couple of moments and be a little bit more thoughtful in your message, because anyone who's using LinkedIn, they know you can quickly respond. You can push a button that's going to allow you to say, congratulations on the new job. So if you can make it a little bit more personal, it will absolutely stand out in the sea of other people who are trying to increase their engagement on LinkedIn too, and are on every Tuesday and Thursday morning hitting the like buttons on posts as well. If you haven't, certainly a lot of people on the call today have probably already synced their contacts at least once. LinkedIn really encourages that when you're setting up your profile. But do that periodically, because think about how many times you are emailing with somebody new, and or perhaps think about an email address that you have not synced up. I certainly have, I think, probably 2 or 3 personal email addresses as well as my work email address. So make sure that everything gets synced, and that just helps to make sure that you've connected with LinkedIn or you've connected on LinkedIn with everyone that you should be connected with. Personally, I have every intent of, connecting with every person on LinkedIn that I meet out at a networking event, or every potential new client that I meet with. It, in my mind, should be part of my workflow that as soon as I get back to my computer or get to my car and I'm sitting there for a moment on my phone, I should connect with every person. But I just don't do it. It is a habit I haven't formed, and I would imagine that that is true of a lot of you. So syncing periodically with your active contacts and email is a really good way to catch some people that you might have missed doing that for. Another recommendation is to tap into industry news and relevant topics. LinkedIn has a resource called the Daily Rundown. It keeps you up to speed on professional news, stories, and conversations. That's not so much about networking. I mean, you can certainly get into dialogues with other professionals, so that is a way to increase your network. But another side benefit that I've found in following along with content sources that are relevant to me is it is a natural way for me to be thinking about topics that I want to post about myself. And of course, be part of a larger conversation that is initiated by these other content posters. But it is a very natural way of teeing up some ideas in my own mind about what I can be posting personally, because posting yourself is a big part of leveraging the platform. The more you post about what's going on in your industry, the more you will be regarded as a thought leader and a source of expertise, which is exactly how you want to position yourself if you're using this platform for new business opportunities. This also, by selecting some of the content sources or topics, as I was alluding to, it allows you to set up a highly relevant feed for yourself. So everyone, I mean, there are a million ways to consume content these days. Quite frankly, there are too many choices, at least for me. But using LinkedIn as a source of content is a smart thing to do if you are wanting to double down on your efforts to make LinkedIn work for you and generate leads for you. I already talked about this or alluded to this just a little bit, but you want to flex your thought leadership. So not only do people want to be convinced of your expertise in areas that you provide services in, but it also gives them a chance to understand your point of view and start to create, even subconsciously, an impression of you, of whether they'd like to work with you. And all of that is very positive because not only do you want to create a very good impression on people, to create that desire in them to work with you, but you also want them to sort of know your point of view and your perspective on things, because that's going to lead to a higher probability of a successful relationship once you embark on that together. So if you are not already publishing thought leadership, I would encourage you to think about with what frequency you could afford to publish that type of content. And there is no singular school of thought about, I guess, if you're publishing content on your own to serve as evidence of your thought leadership, there are several schools of thought as to what the right approach to do is, whether you should really, really chase that frequency goal or whether you should be really being very realistic about what you can commit to and then making the content that you post really quality. Personally speaking, if someone, let's say is a small business owner and they are wearing a ton of different hats and posting solid content is simply not a viable, like on a very regular basis, is simply not a realistic option for them, I would highly encourage simply dedicating oneself to very good, thoughtful content at the frequency that they can commit to, even if it's only once a quarter. So, because, I mean, honestly, if you're posting content that seems like fluff and doesn't have any unique point of view present to, 100 other posts that were posted just like that in the past hour, from my perspective, yes, there's still some value in it, but not as much value as if you really put thought and intent into doing it the right way. So let's talk a little bit about direct messaging. You can send direct messages to people that you are connected to, of course. You can also do what's called in-mail to connect with people that you might not be connected with. I would just say that every time that you embark upon messaging somebody that you are not currently connected with, be very clear in what that message is going to contain so that your outreach makes sense to the other person and so that it doesn't feel like nothing more than a lead generation tactic. And it's really important to be careful with that because people are getting more and more savvy and recognizing what is sincere and genuine versus the alternative. So for purposes of learning today, we've got an example of something that is not very professional and or personalized, and then something that has a better tone that you would want to try to emulate. So the one that you wouldn't want to do is, I'm very interested in sitting down to talk about how my services can benefit your business. Do you have time this week for a call? So you might already be formulating an opinion on where that could be improved, but I'll point out a few things that stand out to me. You lead with yourself and your intent, when really that is probably not going to matter very much to the stranger that you're sending a message to. You're not being specific at all about what the service is or how it can benefit the person receiving the message's business. And then you're going in for a pretty hard close with the, do you have time this week for a call? I would put money down that a message like that is not going to generate very much of a positive response from anyone who it's sent to. The other thing is this one is so generic. People will intuit that this could very well be a cut and paste message that's going out in batches to hundreds of people. So the one that's better uses the name George. When you came up on LinkedIn as someone I should connect with, I visited your profile. I noticed we have 17 people in common, and we are in quite a few of the same local groups. I can't believe we haven't run into each other to date. If you're open, let's connect. So it gives a very strong reason why Jason is sending the message to George, that George popped up in the feed of people that he should connect with. He's looked into it further. You have all these people in common. Can't really believe you haven't run into each other, which just conveys a sense of shared community already with that language. And then it's pretty casual in the call to action, so to speak. Say, if you're open, let's connect. It doesn't seem very salesy. Seems like a genuine, more of a networking opportunity than anything else. So that's more of the tone that you're going to want to go for. And InMail does have a higher response rate than regular email if you were cold emailing people. So that's a positive thing about InMail as well. So we have about 15 minutes left in our time together. We're at the end of the content that I have prepared for today, but want to open it up for any questions from people on the line. Kendra, could you go over? Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Leslie. And just a reminder, if you would like to submit a question, you can type it in through the chat box. That can be found on the bottom left corner of your screen. Simply type in your question or comment, then click on the send button. All right, Leslie, back on over to you.
Great. So I have a question from Mark of how do I add a personalized message if I hit connect? And are you, I assume that you are thinking about that grid when LinkedIn serves up all of these recommended contacts and there's just the one button to connect. I'll keep an eye on the feed here to see if I'm wrong about that. But the way that you work around that, because if you are just doing the quick click connect, in my experience, it doesn't allow you to add the personalized message. You would want to go to that person's specific profile and approach them in that way, because you would then have a secondary button available to you where you can either say that you want to connect or send an InMail. Now, sometimes people will have a lock on the message feature depending on how they have set up their privacy. But there is an ability to add a note. If you try to go just the connect route, you can add a note and personalize your invitation that way. Excellent. All right. Keep those questions coming. We certainly can end a little bit early today if necessary, but I do have the next 15 minutes open for questions. There's also, there are a ton of really great resources out there on how to leverage LinkedIn. It's funny because even though this is part of what I do for a living, working with clients on how to market themselves, generate leads, and there's always a pretty heavy focus on social media as part of that equation. Every time I go digging and asking Google some focused questions about LinkedIn, I tend to learn something more every time. So there's nothing stopping you from going out and doing some of your own research. One other thing, as I give people a little bit of time to ask a few additional questions, is that I would recommend thinking about your elevator pitch of what you do and why the way you do it is unique or valuable, and add that text to the top of your LinkedIn profile. It's a good exercise. I'm sure that everyone has heard about the elevator pitch, and it's a tough thing to master. But once you have, definitely include that copy on your profile for other people to understand quickly what you do and why that is significant. So I've got another question here asking that I get a lot of connection requests from those that you think might be trying to mine your connections, brokers, financial planners, etc. What is the etiquette? It is okay to not connect with them. Quite frankly, LinkedIn is your tool for conducting business. And what I've found is the larger my set of connections becomes when it's fluffed up or kind of padded with connections that are not going to be any use to me, or that a year from now I'm never going to remember who this person was, and I can't tell because we don't have a ton of shared connections already. I don't accept the request. I ignore it, to be honest, and that is okay. I think that anyone who is trying to do what you are recognizing that they're trying to do, trying to mine your connections, are not going to be shocked when they get a low response rate. Great question. Okay. Well, I think that looks like we've got a couple more questions here. Recruiters, how should you interact with them? Should you accept their connection requests? Should you seek them out in the industry you practice in? Again, that is a little bit of a judgment call. I would say that if you try to establish the baseline of what would be most helpful to you, whether it is in the industry that you practice in, both whether you are having connection requests from them, determine your evaluation criteria on what you will accept and what you won't. And that'll become kind of second nature in that, do you accept only the recruiters that work in the industry you practice in, but you don't accept others? Just kind of look at what would make them most relevant to you or potentially valuable to you, if not today, someday, and make your decisions based on that. I don't feel like there's a hard and fast answer to give to that. Okay, cool. We're getting some good questions popping in here. Here's a question of what is the best way to address work history that is a little bit all over the place? I would say that it's a little bit situational. My recommendation would be to have a work history that is covered. So you don't want to necessarily take out bits of your work history because you don't want it to show how much you've jumped around or how varied it is. But I'd be very intentional about the About Me section or the introductory language to explain for somebody why that varied workplace is actually a benefit, and try to turn that into a positive, whether it shows how much flexibility you have in your thinking or your experience, how you can draw on a lot of different areas, that kind of thing. I mean, obviously this is all off the top of my head, but get ahead of that concern and reference the varied work history and why that's actually a benefit is my recommendation. Then we've got a question, does the person requesting the connection get the notification if you have decided to ignore it? Not to my knowledge, no. And then we've got a question of how selective can the email be? I don't want to send a message that Richard, could you clarify just a little bit if you're still listening? It says, I don't want to send a message that I know in LinkedIn to everyone in my contacts. Looking forward to trying to answer that for you. Just want to make sure that I understand the meaning of your question. We might have lost Richard. Richard, if you are trying to ask that question and it's not coming through and you're still listening, please feel free to drop me an email. I'm Leslie at willowmarketing.com. Happy to help you with that question as long as I make sure that I understand what's at the root of it. How do you post about an award you received without sounding like you are bragging? That's a great question and one that a lot of people struggle with. Number one, you do have the ability to just update your profile with the award without making it so much of a post. But honestly, I would recommend making it a post, and I would recommend just leading in with an introduction that's something like, so humbled to have received this award for blah, 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 fill in the blank, from ABC organization. And then I would pivot into talking just a little bit about what that organization does or why the organization is great, so that your post ends up seeming a little bit more focused on the worthwhileness of the awarding organization, but you still manage to slip in that information about the award that you received. That's what I would do personally. I also see a question here from Mark, the pros and cons of turning on career interests. I wish I knew how to answer that for you. I have not done that myself, nor have I worked with clients on that. Let me just peek over here real quick and see whether there's anything that I can glean. So what I'm seeing in the platform is that the career interests section, at least the way that LinkedIn describes it, is that it's to let recruiters know that you're open. So that to me says that the pro of turning on the career interests, if you are open to moving jobs, that's the bat signal, so to speak, to say that you are a little bit more of an open of a prospect than someone who does not have that turned on would be. And you can kind of give them content, or essentially you're sort of giving them categories or tags of things that the types of positions you're open to, locations that you're open to, whether you are looking for full-time jobs. It also appears that this could be a great way to find interesting volunteer opportunities, which I had not really thought about before. So I would say that my short, kind of off-the-cuff response would be, you know, the real benefit there is you're letting recruiters know you're open. We've got about 3 more minutes for anyone who might want to squeeze in an additional question or two. Well, I was extremely honored to have been asked by AHLA to present to you guys today. Thank you for the engagement. Thank you for the wonderful questions that you asked. I hope that everyone has found something beneficial today, something that they can turn around and apply to their own work and tactics. And I hope that this today has given everyone some things to think about. Certainly, if you'd like to connect with me, Leslie Lewis on LinkedIn, and I'd be very excited to see some of the things that you guys are doing with efforts to leverage the platform. I think we're about out of time.
All right, great. Leslie, thank you so much, and thank you for that great presentation. We're getting a lot of positive comments. Everyone does appreciate your insight.